I wanted to do a quick overview on this Nelco Model N15 portable sewing machine before I let it go from my collection for good. This was intended as a clone of a Elna Lotus portable sewing machine, and it weighs in at about 16 pounds, so it's a couple pounds heavier than a Elna Lotus or a Singer Featherweight with its case. As you'll see, it does have a built-in portable handle. Right now the spool pins are blocking it, but it's right there. And the first thing you want to know about this machine is that the instructions for threading it and winding a bobbin are right here on the side cover. The second most important thing to know about this sewing machine is that in order for it to work, this spool pin that retracts must be lifted. There's a locking mechanism on the machine, and if that is pushed down, the hand wheel will not turn past a certain point. Following that, on the side you have your power port and your power switch. When that switch is off, you can't sew and you have no light. Moving up, you've got your hand wheel with your stop motion knob or clutch, your bobbin winder, second spool pin. This sewing machine is twin needle capable. You've got your stitch selection dial. This is your bobbin winder tensioner. And then, of course, your take-up arm or take-up lever, whichever you prefer. Moving to the front of the machine, you have your straight stitch and then zigzag selector. They call it the zigzag width, but on 0 or the leftmost position, you'll get a straight stitch. To the right of that is your needle position sensor. It allows you to move your needle either left, center, or right, whichever you prefer for that perfect stitch allowance. Moving down to the right, we've got the stitch length selector, and below that we have the reverse lever. The reverse lever, if you push it to the right and down, it's spring loaded and will come back up. If you push it down into the left, it locks in place, and you must push it to the right to unlock it. Let's move on to winding a bobbin. So normally you're going to have a spool of thread on one of these two pins. I'm not going to use a spool of thread, I'm going to use my comb thread, but you would do this in exactly the same way. You'll take the thread in your hand, you'll pass it through these two discs, which is the bobbin winding tensioner right here. Then you're going to grab a class 15 bobbin. These are the standard class 15 bobbins. Notice they're flat, not domed on the top. They are not class 66 bobbins. They're class 15. Make sure you get the right one. And you're going to want to pass the thread through one of the holes in the bobbin. Doesn't matter what hole. Then you're going to place the bobbin onto the bobbin winder, and you're going to push it to the left to where it's against the stopper. Now, before you start winding, you want to hold the center of your hand wheel, and you want to disengage the clutch or the stop motion knob by turning it counterclockwise. That's the inner knob here, not the hand wheel, and that will disengage the sewing motion. Once the sewing motion has been disengaged, you're going to press your pedal and fill your bobbin. As you can see, when the bobbin's full, the machine stops automatically. If you're doing a small project, of course, you do not need to fill the bobbin completely. Now, what you want to do is you want to move the bobbin back to the left, and then you want to grab your hand wheel, the outside of it, and turn the stop motion knob in the center clockwise. And that locks the sewing mechanism back in place. Now you're ready to begin sewing. Okay, now that we have a bobbin wound, the next thing we need to do is install it into the bobbin case. The bobbin case is accessed by pulling up on this door, grabbing the latch with your finger, this latch here, because my finger is going to be in the way, open it straight out and give it a pull. And you'll see a little bit closer up, this is the latch that I was pulling on. It pulls straight out with the finger at 12 o'clock. Now I'm going to take this old bobbin out. We're going to install the new bobbin so you can see how it's done. With the back of the bobbin case facing you, you want to make sure that your thread is coming off the top right of your bobbin before you install it. That's very important. You're going to place your bobbin in the bobbin case, line up the hole with the shaft. Then you're going to put the thread through this little slot and work it up into this U shape here. You heard the click, it should click, and then it should be in the middle of the U shape. So your bobbin is now threaded and ready to go. In order to help hold it, you'll pull on this lever, and you want this finger to be at 12 o'clock when you're inserting it back into the machine. Okay, the bobbin's clicked into place. Give it a little tug, just make sure it's in there. You don't want it coming out. Drop the thread down in there and close the door. Now we're going to move on to threading the upper part of the sewing machine. Before you start threading the upper part of the sewing machine, there are two things I want you to make sure are true. One, that your take-up lever is at the top position, and two, that your presser foot is up. Your presser foot is directly behind, your presser foot lift is directly behind the foot on the back of the machine. Just lift it up. That ensures that your tension discs are open so the thread can pass between them. If they're not open, you're going to have issues with your stitches. You'll likely have very large loops on the bottom of your fabric, and it will make an awful noise. This is true of all machines. Make sure your presser foot is lifted before you begin threading the upper part of the machine. So to thread the upper part of the machine, what you want to do is from your thread spool, I'm using a bobbin, but you'll be using a thread spool more than likely. You want to place the fabric in the top thread guide. Then you want to move down to the tensioner. Go down and around the tensioner. I want you to go past it and let it go. There's a spring in here that you need to make sure you catch, and going past the original thread and letting it go catches that spring. You'll feel it too when you pull on it. There's going to be a little spring action after you've done that. If you don't have that, double check that you've threaded the tension properly. After threading the tension, you want to go through the next thread guide, which is right here. 2 fingers helps. Okay, put your tension back where it was. And then you want to make sure you're threading your take-up lever or take-up arm from right to left. So pass the thread through the eye from right to left. You want to bring the thread straight down. You want to catch this thread guide at the bottom. It threads from where it pops in from left to right, and then the next thread guide above the needle pops in from right to left. So the next part is threading the needle. Before we thread the needle, when you're installing a needle in this machine, you want to make sure that the flat side of the needle is facing the back of the machine. It's very important. If you don't do that, you'll skip stitches, you may not get stitches, you may have what looks like a tension issue. So always make sure that the flat part of the needle is facing the back of the machine and that the needle is pushed all the way up in the needle hole when you install it. Okay, now we've got the needle installed. what you want to do is you want to thread this needle from front to back. Now that I have the needle threaded from front to back, it's time to bring up the lower thread from the bobbin case. In order to do that, I want you to take a hold of your upper thread, and I want you to make one full rotation of the hand wheel. The needle will go all the way down and the needle will come all the way back up. Once it's all the way back up to the top of its travel, give that upper thread a pull and you'll find a loop comes up. That loop right there is your bottom thread. Pull that out, put the threads under the foot into the back, and you're ready to sew. And we're ready to sew. I want you to go ahead and take your piece of material, whatever it is, drop the presser foot down. With one hand, hold the two threads in the back. This just helps the stitch get started nice and pretty. Select your stitch length, make sure it's right. So for this thinner fabric, I'm going to use about a 2.5 millimeter stitch. I'm going to start by stitching forward a few stitches. And then I'm going to reverse to back tack and lock in my stitches by holding down this R lever. Then I'm going to release the R lever and let it sew forward again. Now this machine can sew pretty slow, or it can sew pretty quickly if you're an advanced sewer and you like speed. Please ignore the wobbling. This table's got a hollow center and this top tends to bounce when I'm sewing on it, but the machine actually is very smooth and relatively quiet for a mechanical sewing machine. So let's say we don't want a straight stitch. As you can see, we've got a nice, lovely straight stitch there. Beautiful tension. You've got a lot of other options. This machine has 10 different stitches, including tri-motion stretch stitches for sewing knits and stretchy fabrics. But the most common after the straight stitch is going to be your zigzag stitch. So while you've got the selector knob in straight and zigzag, let me tilt that forward so you can see it. So right now the black mark is at zigzag and straight stitch. The reason we don't have a zigzag right now is because we don't have the zigzag width up. For anything other than a straight stitch, you're going to want this width to be somewhere to the right of the straight stitch indicator on the left. I'm just going to go for the widest zigzag, which I believe is probably about 5 millimeters. Adjust your stitch length if necessary, and make sure your needle's out of the fabric before you adjust this zigzag width. Once you've adjusted it, you can go ahead and resume sewing. And as you see, we've got a nice pleasing zigzag stitch with really nice tension on the bottom. And a squeaky pedal. Okay, so now let's bring the needle back out of the fabric and we're going to change stitches. One thing I want you to note about this machine before you start playing with it too much is before you touch this dial, make sure your zigzag width is all the way to the left at straight stitch. Don't force this dial. It needs to be on straight stitch to turn easily. So we're going to go ahead and select a different stitch. We've got so many choices to make. Let's try one of the, here's an overcast stitch. So you can use this stitch to overcast your fabric if you don't have a serger. You would run the edge of the fabric down the middle of the foot and it would go over the edge to lock in the seam and make sure that the fabric doesn't fray. So let's just go ahead and try this stitch. As you can see, it's color coded. So there's a red mark here. You want to make sure that your zigzag width is at the red mark and your stitch length is at the red mark. Okay, let's give it a try. And because this is a stretch stitch, you'll notice that the fabric moves forward, then backwards, then forward as you sew. That's normal. That's how you get the fancy stretch stitches. And you'll see here we've got a really beautiful stretch stitch right here that you could use for overcasting your fabric. Looks just as nice on the back as it does on the front. And one of the more useful utility stitches that you can do is the triple zigzag, or the, I believe it's called a tricot stitch. It's very good for reinforcing something that's going to get a lot of wear, or actually attaching tricot to the fabric. First, again, we need to make sure the needle is up, which it is. We need to make sure the stitch width lever is all the way to the left, and then we can change our stitch. And this is the tricot stitch here. Notice that it's in the blue zone. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our zigzag width back to blue. In case you can't see it in the video, that dot's green. That dot's blue. It may not come through in the video. And then right now on the stitch style, you'll see that basically from about 0.7 millimeters all the way to 4 is our option for a blue stitch like this stitch. Personally, I find tricot looks the best around a 1. Any larger and it just looks like a very large zigzag stitch. So let's give that a try. I guess the video cut off while I was doing the tricot stitch, so here's the finished stitch anyway. There you go, your triple stitch zigzag or tricot stitch. This is the front of the stitch, and that's the back of the stitch. Nice and even tension. One thing I wanted to mention before I demonstrate this next bit is that even though this machine is a 1/2 or 3/4 size machine, it comes with a very powerful 1 amp motor. This is a Japanese made machine, not a Chinese or Taiwanese machine, so it's very good quality. And one of the great parts about having a good quality machine like that is they will handle pretty heavy work. I'm not suggesting industrial work. It's not an industrial machine. You should not use it as an industrial machine. Anyone that sells a home sewing machine and tells you it's an industrial machine is not being straightforward with you. Having said that, in home tasks, if you find that you need to do personal home or auto upholstery, jeans, denim, canvas work, for your personal use, not for business use, this machine will be able to do most of that. You're basically limited to what goes under the foot. So right here, I have 6 layers of Wrangler thick, heavy cowboy jean denim. I've already stitched on it a couple times when I was posting this machine for sale, but we're going to go ahead and do probably a zigzag just so you can see, another zigzag on here. The machine did it. And this machine will sew it at a slow or a fast pace. It doesn't really matter to it. I was limited to 6 layers because of the thickness. So if you have thinner denim than this heavy denim that Wrangler uses, you should be able to probably get 8 layers of denim under the foot and use it that way. And it takes low shank feet, so there are many low shank feet out there you can use. There's a low shank walking foot attachment that you could use. You could also get a low shank snap-on feet adapter and a set of snap-on feet for very inexpensive prices. eBay's always the best source for those kind of things, in my opinion. So let's go ahead and sew this denim. So as you can see, there's a little bit of space under the foot. You might get another layer or two, but you know, I don't want to tell you it will do a whole lot more than this because it's not got a whole lot more lift in it. So go ahead and place the work under the foot. We're going to do a zigzag just so you can see the new stitches. And we're going to start slow because the machine can do slow on heavy work or it can do fast. So we're taking a nice leisurely pace now. And guys, don't use don't use bobbins to hold your thread. They tend to they're not heavy enough and they tend to let the thread out of the thread guide. Anyway, I'm just going to hold this bobbin a little bit so it doesn't fall out, but you can go very quickly on denim too. Notice the noise the machine made, hardly changed. And as you can see, there's a really awesome zigzag on the front and there's a really awesome zigzag on the back. So it will handle what you need to do regardless of its size. And you know, if you're moving your sewing machine around, that's a benefit. Anyhow, I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope it's helpful. As a side note, if you have a JCPenney Penncrest portable sewing machine, I believe the model is P1, but I'll put it in the description below. Everything on that machine is identical to this machine. That machine was built by Nelco. The only difference between the two machines is that I have never seen one of the Penncrest portables with the stitch selector dial. This machine has 10 stitches plus a buttonhole built in up here, whereas that machine is a straight stitch, zigzag, and needle position only machine, which is plenty for most people. But this machine adds a lot of added functionality for knits and stretch fabric by adding these additional stitches for you. So I hope everyone's having a great day, and I wish you happy sewing.